Bold with the Bold Report. Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull was today in Laos for the ASEAN meeting, talking trade and terrorism, and Sam Dastyari. Well, meanwhile, former Prime Minister Tony Abbott, well, he was in the Kimberley for his annual week visiting Aboriginal communities. Now, I'm hearing that the Turnbull camp is getting very jumpy about Abbott, who used to be written off as dead and buried by the media. He's gone, forget it. But today, even Turnbull's biggest media booster, the Australian's Nikki Savva, whose husband works for Turnbull, which I do think she should declare, said no one in the government was now in any doubt about Abbott's intentions. And even she warned that if Turnbull could not get his act together, he was doomed. To the panel, Rowan Dean and Labor campaign guru Bruce Hawker. Rowan, what a surprise to see you.
Well, listen, I'm standing in for Graham Richardson. I hope he's well. But Richo and I are like that politically. So really, for the viewer, is there really a difference? I think that pretty much whatever I say would be what Graham would be saying.
Joined at the hip.
Look, but Bruce, rumours that the Turnbull camp is now starting to freak about Abbott. Well, if it is, should it be?
Look, I do think Turnbull is making a complete mess of the Prime Ministership, and I don't think anybody would seriously argue with that. You know, Sam Dastyari came along in the last few days to provide them with some welcome relief from the pressure that he's been under, but he's a man enjoying 12 months, I think, in the Prime Ministership, and I can't point to any achievement that he can crow about in any shape or form. And of course, that really gives rise to questions in the Liberal Party backbench, particularly, and those in marginal seats about, you know, what's it going to look when an election is held, and when might an election be held? You know, where they've got a majority of one in the House of Reps. They can't assume that they're going to go the full 3 years. I think they probably will, but they can't assume it. So it doesn't come as any surprise to me that people would be looking at this fellow and basically saying, well, if it to be done would be better it be done soon. That could well be the case.
Yeah, well, yes. And I think next week is going to be a bit tricky, Rome, because I think the meme has gone out about just what Bruce said. I mean, I even asked Jeff Kennett here. Now, Jeff Kennett, right, he might not be a great fan of Turnbull, but he very much wants Turnbull to succeed. He couldn't think of anything the man had done in a year either. So next week, I think that's going to be a bit tricky for Malcolm Turnbull. There's going to be a lot of people writing about it, and they will come up against the same problem.
Well, it's a year since he rolled Tony Abbott, and he made some very, very explicit promises, Andrew. He promised an economic leadership was the main one, and we just haven't seen it. It's that simple. You can't spin your way out of that and pretend that it's been there and we've missed it, or they're working on it, or what have you. It's not there. They've failed to deliver that. We were promised all these other kind of motherhood statements about exciting times and vision for the future, none of which has been delivered. And we were promised a glorious election victory that Abbott would not have been able to deliver, whereas I would argue, many would disagree, but I would argue that Tony Abbott would have actually done better in this election that we've just had than Malcolm Turnbull did, purely because he would have fought on things like boats, which he was proud of, which Turnbull shied away from. So, the magnifying glass is now on Malcolm Turnbull. When you have people like Nikki Savva, who've spent 12 months telling us how brilliant Malcolm Turnbull was, and it was just round the corner, this great moment of leadership, this great thing was about to burst into a wonderful Turnbull era. We haven't seen it. Even those people are starting to panic. It's inevitable, and your question, which you've asked so many people now, I hope you're stringing them together in a line because it is so powerful, no one can think of a single achievement.
You know, it'd be interesting. Can I say just on that? You know, it'd be very interesting, you know, if Labor were just to run an ad along those lines. I mean, it was a devastating ad against the Labor government in Western Australia a few years ago, where they said, "Can you think of one thing that this government's done?" And then there's silence. And I think you could run an ad like that quite effectively against Turnbull. Mind you, I'm not sure that Labor particularly wants to see Turnbull go right now. Such is the weirdness of Australian politics these days. I mean, I thought when he came into office that he could actually represent something of an existential threat to Labor, bringing his party, you know, towards the centre and occupying some of the space that Labor had traditionally occupied. Did none of that. failed to satisfy, therefore, the progressive elements in Australian society, upset the right, and now he finds himself caught between two stools and in a lot of trouble and wishing, I think, that the G20 would just keep going on and on and on.
But can I pick up on something that Rowan said, though, Bruce, where he said that he believed that Tony Abbott could have done as well, if not better, than Malcolm Turnbull in the last election. Now, obviously, next week it's going to be about what has Malcolm Turnbull done, but a subtext would be, was the move to him worth it? And everything will be on whether or not the fact that he won the election, was that justification enough? What's your view as an election strategist?
Very hard, really, to form a view as to whether Abbott would have done better than Turnbull. I think, on balance, it was probably going south under Abbott. He wasn't really cutting it with the electorate particularly well, but if he gets a second chance, who knows? He might do a Menzies and come back. But I don't think that Turnbull, in his wildest dreams, would have thought that he would have just scraped across the line with a one-seat majority, and that goes probably to a lot in his own personal make-up, his own sense of his own importance and so forth, which I think is a dangerous commodity in politics. It has to be kept in check all the time, otherwise you do find yourself in all sorts of trouble very quickly. I don't think he's the sort of person who probably takes advice particularly well from others. And we're seeing now the results of that, neither satisfying the left on his party nor the right, and putting himself in a position, as Nikki Savva and others are saying, well, maybe the clock is just starting to run on this fellow now. Maybe they're getting to the point where they're saying, well, maybe not Abbott, but someone else in the ranks. And of course,
Rowan, I've got 10 seconds. I've got 10 seconds left. What do you think? Will Tony Abbott come back?
I think the Australian public have now been trained that if their leaders aren't up to scratch, the leader goes. And you would never have thought that 10 years ago under John Howard, but now they've trained us. The political class have trained us to expect high standards. If you don't deliver, you're out. Someone else has a go, or you bring the old bloke back for another go. Who knows?
Bruce Hawker and Rowan Dean. And Rowan, thanks for stepping in. Thanks
Pleasure.
to you both.
Thank you.
For me now, good night.